السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليكم مني جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. Respected sisters, dear brothers, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The intention from today will inshallah simply be to have a Q&A about the topics that we talked about. But given that this is the eve of the maqtal, the eve of the day in which we commemorate the martyrdom, the remembrance of Imam Husayn alayhi salam. For those of you who did not perform the maqtal today, it is tomorrow. I thought I'd start just a couple of minutes by a refresher about the significance of this day and what is expected of us for today and tomorrow, inshallah. Then we can do a few minutes of a recap of the main themes we talked about. And then I thought we would finish one with a very quick tragedy of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam before starting the Q&A, simply out of respect for this night, so that it doesn't just become a discussion, even though the discussion inshallah remains about Imam Husayn alayhi salam and his tragedies. We still mention one of the tragedies of Karbala, and then we get into the Q&A. For the refresher, simply to remember that between tonight and tomorrow, we are supposed to remain in a state of sorrow. We are supposed to stay in a state as though our closest friend, our closest family member has been deceased, has left this world, and in a tragic way. Someone who is in that state does not really engage in laughter, in joking, in watching TV, in entertainment, and it does not need to last too long, at least out of respect for today and tomorrow, the day of the maqtal. We try to remain in this state in general. That's the first point. Secondly, if you go back to the books of a'mal, you will see that a lot of a'mal are mentioned, mustahabbat. The companions of Imam Husayn alayhi salam, on the eve of their martyrdom, they remained in a state of worship until the morning. They didn't sleep that night. We're not necessarily saying that this is what we do, but try to do something to make you feel that you are consoling Imam Husayn alayhi salam. You are participating in the same type of behavior on a similar night. Do something that brings you close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do some act of worship, and do not let this night pass by as though it is just an ordinary night, and don't let tomorrow pass by as though it is just another ordinary day. In fact, Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam say, if possible, during that day, this is not haram, it is simply discouraged. If you need to go to school, go to school. If you need to work, do your work. But if you have the choice between doing it and not, it is preferable not to engage in worldly activities on the day of the maqtal. This is mentioned explicitly by our imams. If you can, don't engage in things of this world, especially not things that are very material and mundane. Don't go shopping. Don't beautify yourself. This is not the day to look pretty. This is not the day to look good. This is not the day to buy new things and be happy about them in your home. New furniture, things that make you happy. This is not the day for those activities. This is a day to remember Imam Husayn alayhi salam, and if possible, to cry. This is what's mentioned in the narrations, and it is said, if you cannot cry, مَنْ لَمْ يَسْتَطِعِ الْبُكَاء فَلْيَتَبَاكَى. Put yourself in a situation, in a state that at least encourages crying and weeping, even though you may not cry yourself. If you can though, you should. Okay? The one perhaps thing that I want to add is that one of the most important actions to perform tonight and tomorrow, inshallah, will be to recite the ziyarah of Imam al-Husayn. And we have many of them. The most famous one, of course, is Ziyarat Ashura. In addition to Ziyarat Ashura, you can also perform the ziyarah, for instance, of Al-Nahiya Al-Muqaddasa. You get the version of the maqtal from Imam Al-Mahdi Ajjalallahu Farajah, where in his own words and in his own way, attributed to him, this is what actually happened. And so it is quite a graphic description again of the events of Ashura, but this time coming from one of our Imams. And if you can't understand it in Arabic, as blessed as the words we believe are of these ziyarat, try to at least recite it in English too, in a way so that you understand what you're reading for tonight and tomorrow night, and the same thing for the maqtal. If you don't understand the Arabic maqtal that is usually recited, there are plenty of English maqatil right now that are being recited. Make sure that you understand what is being said. If one day in the year you're going to do that, this is supposed to be the day. So those were the couple of points I wanted to mention. As for the refresher, and I'll go very quickly here so that we keep as much time as possible for the questions. We spoke initially about the importance of connecting with Imam Husayn alayhi salam emotionally and through the heart. The reason we talked about this is because sometimes I think we need a reminder, we need to rebalance things. In the past, the main connection with Imam Husayn alayhi salam used to be an emotional one. As of late, there has been a lot of insistence on the intellectual aspect of connecting, understanding, analyzing Karbala and Imam Husayn alayhi salam, which is not only important, it's necessary. So we're not saying it's one or the other. Inshallah, the message is clear. We are saying both are required. But if you go back to the teachings of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, the initial connection with Imam al-Husayn is an emotional connection of the heart, to which we add an analytical or intellectual component. So inshallah, that part is clear. And the reason why we talked about this from the beginning is that we want to not hold back during Muharram and tomorrow and tonight. Certainly, do not hold back your feelings for Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam. Let them flow. This is the time to connect with the Imam, and Ahlul Bayt are teaching us that the easiest, the fastest, the most direct way to connect with Imam Husayn alayhi salam is through our tears, is through our emotions. We can think about the Imam throughout the year. We can read about the Imam. We can analyze the entire movement of the Imam. But this is in those specific days, remember the Imam through your heart. And of course, it helps to understand what happened, because in fact, the more you understand, the more you're going to feel about what happened for the Imam alayhi salam. Then we began the series about the world being an ideological battleground or battlefield. The first topic that we talked about was God. And we said this is the first, most important, most deep of the questions that we definitely need to address and take a position about when it comes to positioning ourselves in the world and knowing who we are, where we stand. Once this question is resolved appropriately, convincingly for ourselves, everything else can fall in order. If you have doubts about the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you go back and you need to fix this issue first. Everything else stems from that issue. We can't talk about prayer and fasting and wudu and hijab if you have doubts about the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You start from the beginning. Okay? And we mentioned a couple of books there. We can come back to them in the discussion. We spoke about materialism. We said that there are only two worldviews in the world today. Either you accept a godly worldview, a worldview where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in the middle of everything that how you understand and interpret the world and your place in it. There is a God or there isn't. There isn't, you are in a materialist worldview. You are in a worldview that only has matter in it, which means that you as a human being, you are only made up of this body and nothing beyond, which means that you cannot really justify anything being right and wrong in the moral sense, because all of this comes from the godly worldview. And in fact, in today's world, when you hear about good and bad, good and evil, these are remnants from a Judeo-Christian worldview. These are not things that came out of the modern worldview. This cannot be justified by the modern materialist worldview, in any case. And there was a quick point here to make sure that we don't fall on the misconception that Islam is against living a good, comfortable, luxurious life. Okay, so inshallah that point was clear as well. Then we spoke about the past. We went back in history to see how we're saying that today is a battleground of worldviews. Well, the past was as well, including the time of Imam Husayn alayhi salam. And what led to the tragedy of Karbala were those worldviews which have their parallels today, the same ones. And so we spoke about Bani Umayyah, and we spoke about the hypocrites, and we spoke about the Khawarij, and we spoke about those who were there from the time of the Holy Prophet and what they believed in and what they did that led ultimately to the tragedy of Karbala. So inshallah, all of that was clear. And in passing, we also mentioned very quickly the role of the Romans and all of that. That was mentioned in passing simply to complement the discussion. Then we asked the question, was the Imam successful alayhi salam in everything that he sacrificed? And we said in order to answer this question, we have to answer a question before it, which is, what was the mission of the Imam? What was he trying to achieve, so that we can answer the question whether he was successful or not? And we said that ultimately what the Imam was trying to do was not political, was not social, was not humanitarian, even though all of that was included in his mission. His mission was a mission of guidance. He wanted to guide human beings, to unshackle them from the materialist world, from the world that we talked about earlier, so that they are not cheap, they are not indoctrinated, they are not enslaved to other people, that they are free, dignified human beings. Okay? And the next point that we spoke about had to do with the aftermath. So in order to answer whether the Imam alayhi salam was successful or not, we said, let's look at the events that took place after Karbala. What happened in the Islamic world? And we mentioned a number of revolutions that took place immediately following the event of Karbala, and over the next 70 years that ultimately led to the entire collapse of the Umayyad dynasty, to Bani Umayyah's dynasty. A succession of revolutions. We mentioned a few of them, what happened in Mecca, what happened in Medina, what happened in Kufa, and then we focused on the Tawabun, the movement of the repenters. The point from the movement of the repenters is that once we understand that they are people who woke up and realized their shortcomings and their failures towards Imam Husayn alayhi salam, towards their responsibilities and duties, this is perhaps something that we should be focusing on too about ourselves. Are we going to wake up, and are we going to have our own internal spiritual movement or revolution of repentance towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? That was the point of all of this discussion, even though we ended it by going away from the political and social movements to the answer that Imam Sajjad alayhi salam gave. When he was asked whether Imam Husayn alayhi salam won or lost, he said, if there's anyone worshipping God and still reciting the adhan and the iqamah, then it means that Imam Husayn alayhi salam was the one who won. And this is something that we have to keep in mind in our lives today. Then we focused on another of the areas that are definitely part of the ideological battleground that we talked about, and this was the family. And we talked about it in 2 separate lectures. We could have dedicated the whole series to the families. In the first lecture, we focused on the place or the right of the parents specifically, whereas in the second lecture, we spoke a little bit more about the general principles that produce a happy, healthy, good family in Islam. And we compared that vision, the Islamic vision of the family, when we compared it to what we call the neoliberal foundation, the modern foundation of looking at the family in today's world, where we are creating a world that is based on GDP and who is making more income, and an individualistic world as opposed to the complementary world, where in our Islamic point of view, we believe that a human being is not a full human being unless they are part of a bigger unit, and that unit is the foundation of society. It's not the individual, it is the family. And when we look at all of humanity, this also applies to ethnicities and races, that none of them are the full humanity. The full humanity is all of them taken together, because everyone is missing something that we find somewhere else. And this is what gives us the full human being in Islam. The last lecture that we had was about linking the past with the present and then the future. And the point of that lecture is, of course, to understand our duties towards the Imam of our time. That's the point of that last lecture, in which we try to take some of the lessons that we learned from Karbala and link them back to the present, to understand that our Imams are expecting things from us. There is a responsibility, there is a duty. We have to act in a way that makes the Imam happy, proud that we are his followers. And that's when we talked about the three commitments. A commitment towards the others, that we share the message of Karbala. A commitment towards our communities, so that we unite and strengthen our communities. And a commitment towards ourselves, so that when we act in a way that is in compliance with what the Imam was trying to do. Or in another word, we said to answer the call of the Imam when he said, "Ala min nasirin yansuruna." Is there no one who is going to be our supporter? This was what we covered generally over the nights, while at the same time looking at the travels of Imam Husayn alayhi salam, how he left Medina to Mecca on his way to Kufa, but he was diverted from Kufa to Karbala. We looked at different personalities, and inshallah all of that was useful. Allow us to end with the quick tragedy of the Imam. As we said, the Imam sacrificed a lot to achieve what he achieved. One of his tragedies, as we said, was that he did not only sacrifice his companions and the members of his household, he even sacrificed the little children that were with him. And this did not only happen during the event of Karbala, this stayed the case after the event of Karbala too. When the event of Karbala ended itself, they took the family members of Imam Husayn alayhi salam captives from Karbala. They brought them to Kufa, and then they took them captives from Kufa to Damascus. So from southern Iraq to today's Damascus in Syria. While they were there, they were kept initially beside the palace of Yazid. One of the daughters of Imam Husayn alayhi salam, who was part of that group, was Ruqayiah. The daughter of Imam Husayn alayhi salam, by the name of Ruqayiah, was 3 to 4 years old. She did that entire trip, and she was in Damascus, and the entire trip she would ask her aunt Zainab alayhi salam, "Where is my father Husayn?" Zainab alayhi salam would usually simply answer her that he has traveled far away. He's on a long trip. One day, while they were there in Damascus, Ruqayyah alayhi salam saw Imam Husayn alayhi salam in her dream. So when she woke up, she came again to her aunt, telling her that she really wanted to see her father, that she misses him and she wants to see him. When Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, who were with her in Damascus, heard this, they all cried. They don't know what to tell this young girl, this young child, and this created a commotion. Yazid heard the crying, the weeping of Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam going on. He asked, "What is going on?" They told him, "There's a child, there's a girl of Imam Husayn alayhi salam who wants to see her father." Yazid said, "Give her what she's asking for." So they put the head of Imam Husayn alayhi salam on a platter, and they covered it with a piece of cloth, and they brought it to Ruqayyah alayhi salam. When it was brought to Ruqayyah, she thought that this was food. So she looked to her aunt Zainab alayhi salam, and she told her, "I'm not hungry, I just want to see my father." And Zainab alayhi salam told her, "This is what you were asking for." Ruqayyah removed the cloth, and she saw the head of Imam Husayn alayhi salam on the platter. She cried, and she said, "Father Husayn, who did this to you? Who cut your head?" She kissed the head, and then she hugged it. And she remained in that state, and she calmed down. Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam also calmed down. They thought that this appeased her, this calmed her down. Until Imam Sajjad alayhi salam told his aunt Zainab, "My aunt Zainab, عظم الله لك الأجر." May God reward you, the expression that we use when someone passes away. Zainab alayhi salam said, "Why are you saying this?" Imam Sajjad alayhi salam told her, "My sister Ruqayyah has just passed away." Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah wa ala al-arwah allati hallat bifina'ik. Let's turn to the questions, the comments, anything that you would like to share, anything that you would like to ask. We'll try to keep it focused on what we discussed. I think that will be a little bit more relevant. I'll start with some of the questions that I have received, but if there's anyone or sisters, brothers who have anything to say, please don't be shy. I'll start with one, but open to receiving any questions, comments that anyone wants to share. I can see some papers already moving in the back. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. So I'll start with the first question that I have here. Some of the questions, I received them right before coming. One of them says about the importance of emotion. What if I cannot cry? Is there something wrong with me? First things first, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not create us all the same way. We don't all have the same way of feeling the world. We're not all empathetic in the same way. We don't have the same levels of compassion. We don't react emotionally to things that happen in front of us in the same way. Some of this is genetic. Some of this is social. Some of this is upbringing. Some of this is our own specific personality and our life experience. And all of that is fine. Secondly, as we saw, Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam don't always say, Ahsantum. Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam know that not everyone is going to have an easy time crying over Imam Husayn alayhi salam. And that's why sometimes in their narrations they say, if you cannot cry, مَنْ لَمْ يَسْتَطِعِ الْبُكَاء فَلْيَتَبَاكَى. If you cannot cry, then put yourself in a mood of someone who is about to cry. That's it. This is enough. That's effort on your side. I'm going to add a point. If this point applies to you, inshallah, it is useful. If not, then you can skip over this point. Definitely, your ability to cry has to do with the tenderness of your heart. In our narrations, we are told that this tenderness of the heart can be impacted. There can be barriers that make the heart hard. They harden the heart. The Holy Quran talks about certain verses of the Holy Quran. In some verses of the Holy Quran, it talks about certain people whose hearts have become hard. In some verses it says they've become like rocks or even harder. كَالْحِجَارَةِ أَوْ أَشَدُّ قَسْوَةً. This is very possible. What leads to this? One thing that is mentioned in the narrations is أكل الحرام. If you eat haram, it leads to a hardening of the heart. What is أكل الحرام? It has two meanings. أكل الحرام can mean you actually consume things that are haram. You drink things that you're not supposed to drink. You smoke things you're not supposed to smoke. You eat things you're not supposed to eat. This leads to a change in your heart, to a hardening of your heart. This requires time to be cleansed. The second meaning is that you live your life based on money that has an illicit source, a haram source. So it's not about what you're eating as in the food you're putting in your mouth. It's about what your life is resting on as a financial basis, as a financial foundation. Are you working hard to earn a clean, halal living? Or are you engaging in activities that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not like? Those activities lead to a hardening of the heart. So sometimes all we need to do is clean up our act to steer back ourselves to doing the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to do and stop engaging in things that are haram because they definitely lead to a hardening of the heart. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. A first question here says, how does the Imam of our time, Imam al-Mahdi Ajjallah Ta'ala Farajahu al-Sharif, sends his letters to the scholars? Imam al-Mahdi Ajjallah Ta'ala Farajah, he went into an occultation, a ghaibah. He was still among the people, but he was in hiding. This lasted for 69 years and some months. So we usually say it was 7 years. This was al-Ghaiba al-Sughra, the first occultation of the Imam. During this time, Imam al-Mahdi Ajjallah Farajah would communicate with the Shia, and the Shia could communicate with the Imam through a direct representative that the Imam has appointed. We call those representatives a safir. The Imam had 4 sufara in succession. So when the first safir passes away, the Imam had already told him who is the next safir, and he told the followers, the Shia, that the safir after me is so and so. In one case, he told him exactly in how many days he would pass away. This lasted for 69 years, 7 years. During this time, as we said, the Imam would communicate with the Shia, and the Shia could communicate with the Imam through these representatives directly. They could write to the Imam would answer, and he would answer in fact on the same piece of paper that you would write on. This was well known. Okay, so this is the manner in which the Imam communicated with the people. Once those 7 years were over, the Imam told the last safir that from this point on, there is no longer a safara, there is no longer a direct representation of the Imam. No one is allowed to claim to be a representative of the Imam in the sense of the safara. So it becomes, he gave general rules. He said if someone is meeting those general characteristics, someone is a general faqih, someone is a general muhaddith, they know the narrations of Ahl al-Bayt, the teachings of the school of Ahl al-Bayt, then people can follow this person and consider this person as their role model, which today we call the mujtahid, the marji', the scholar. These are the general rules that the Imam gave, but he did not appoint anyone specifically after that point. So after that point, we do not believe that the Imam was communicating directly with anyone. So that's another question. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The next question, why did they kill the baby and keep Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam knowing that he was sick? Was it hidden? The infant of Imam Husayn alayhi salam who was killed, we don't know if they would have killed that infant specifically or not intentionally, but they killed him when the Imam brought that child to them. Imam Zayn al-Abidin, there are 2 opinions about what was going on with him the day of the 10th of Karbala. One opinion says, and this is the classic version that you hear, that he was very sick. And there are different theories said about what was the sickness that he had. Some sort of paralysis that prevented him from entering the battle. So he was taken as someone who is kind of unable, disabled, and he was taken as a captive. And that's the reason they kept him alive. The other reason, they say, there is potentially that being a reason that Imam Sajjad alayhi salam actually participated in the battles that took place. They call them the skirmishes of the water, ma'arik al-ma', that took place on the 7th, 8th and 9th of Muharram before the 10th, where Imam Husayn and his companions would go to the water and get small quantities of water and come back. These skirmishes were going on in the last few days before Karbala, and one opinion is that Imam Sajjad alayhi salam participated in these battles and he got severely injured. And that's why he could not participate on the 10th. He was injured and he was in the tent and they would take care of him. Imam Sajjad alayhi salam was therefore simply taken as a captive and he was allowed to live. By the time they reached Damascus, it became too much of an affront, too much of a problem for Yazid to continue dishonoring the family of the household of the Holy Prophet. The people were turning against him. So he changed his tone, he changed his message, and he even went as far as being generous towards Ahl al-Bayt when he let them go. He hurriedly pushed them out of Sham. He gave them gifts and he gave them money to give the impression that he was not even the one who ordered the killing of Imam Husayn alayhi salam. He had nothing to do with it. Ibn Ziyad, his governor over Kufa, was the one who was responsible. And in fact, when he ordered the attack on Al-Madinah, which we mentioned, which is called the incident of Al-Harrah, he ordered them to destroy and pillage and loot and do as they want in the Medina al-Munawwara, but to stay away from Ali ibn al-Husayn Zayn al-Abidin. So now there was a flip in the equation where he wanted to show that he has nothing to do with hurting Ahl al-Bayt and by only not harming Imam Sajjad alayhi salam specifically. And so the Imam leveraged this and used it to his benefit, even though he never openly discussed Imam Husayn alayhi salam. That's how we have a Sahif al-Sajjadiyya and other things. Indirectly, the Imam was teaching religion in his own way. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Afwan? Yeah. So the next question, I'll go through as many of them as I can. Inshallah, we keep we keep them going. The next one, why did the husband of Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam not go with Imam Husayn alayhi salam to Karbala? So the husband of Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam, the son of Jafar al-Tayyar, was not with them in Karbala according to the majority opinion, because Imam Husayn alayhi salam had left him in charge of specific things in Al-Madinah. So he was an extremely wealthy man and he could take care of a lot of people, and in fact he did. He sustained a lot of families, a lot of Shia in Hijaz, in Medina al-Munawwara and elsewhere. And the Imam, according to the strongest opinion, had delegated him with specific tasks, and that's why he did not himself participate in the battle or join the Imam in this way. That's the short answer to that question. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. I put money aside with the intention of donating it to Ahl al-Bayt TV channel. However, I had difficulty sending the money. Is it okay to change my intention and use that money to donate to the mosque instead? When you make an intention like this, it depends. There are conditions that have to be met for the money to be considered nadhr. When you say, alayya lillah, lillahi alayya nadhrun, if you use a terminology like this or a wording like this, or in your heart you know that this is a commitment you made to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you have to find a way to honor that commitment. If it was just a general idea that you had, then that's not considered technically a nadhr, which means that there is no issue changing your intention and using the money for any other act of good. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. How do you briefly answer or convince someone of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being all-knowing and merciful and caring for His creation when there is so much misfortune and suffering in the world? This question is considered to be the most difficult question regarding the existence of God. The problem of evil in the world, sometimes referred to as theodicy. In short, the answer to this question is that if you believe that we were created for this world and this world only, there is no answer to this question. And in fact, the argument becomes valid. If you believe that there's an afterlife where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to use His ultimate justice and reward and punish, then you understand that this world is not a world of justice and injustice. This is a world of free will. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to see what human beings will do with their free will. End of story. Sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may intervene, sometimes He may not. The best of people will worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we should expect them therefore to be the people who live the easiest, best, most luxurious lives. In fact, when we look at the lives of the prophets and the messengers and the imams, it was the exact opposite. This world is not a measure of the divine justice and mercy of God. This is a world of testing the will of human beings, and that is it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to see what human beings will do if they are given free will in this world. You want to see the justice of God and the mercy of God, you have to go through this test to the next stage. That's when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and I will show you my mercy and I will show you my justice, and everyone will get the reward and the punishment that they deserve. That's in short the answer to this question. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. How do you explain to Christians why God can't or doesn't have children? Because Christians believe that Jesus is God's son. In short, first of all, this has nothing to do with the series on Karbala and Imam Husayn alayhi salam. In short, the real answer to this question is a little bit more philosophical and theological, to explain the nature of God and why a God cannot have a relationship with anything in the world. In short, this is what the Quran says when it says, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ. There is nothing like God. When we say that God has a child, when we say that God is part of this world and we are part of God and God is part of us and He has family members, and this means that we are breaking the one cardinal rule that applies to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is nothing like God. Saying that God has a child means that He is like us. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot have a child. That's the short, simplified answer to a much deeper philosophical and theological discussion. One of our Imams, I believe it was Imam Rida alayhi salam, at some point when the Khalifa al-Ma'mun had brought all the scholars of the Christians, there was a back and forth, and they wanted to convince the Imam that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had a son, and that was he would be the one therefore that everyone has to follow, Jesus alayhi salam, and not Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi. So the Imam used an argument. He told him, we believe that Jesus alayhi salam, we don't follow him because he was not really a worshipper. He was not that big of a worshipper. And we want to follow someone who is a true worshipper of God. We want to follow someone who prayed a lot to God and who fasted to God. So the monk, the Christian monk that was debating with Imam Rida alayhi salam, he got extremely angered by this. And he told him, there is no one who worshipped more than Prophet Jesus. He prayed more than anyone, and he fasted more than anyone. So Imam Rida alayhi salam told him, who is he praying to? And who is he worshipping? If you are saying that he is the Son of God, or he is God himself, a type of God himself, who is he worshipping? Himself? Or is he worshipping a God, and therefore he is a worshipper, equals a abd, a servant, a creature of God? And that was the end of that discussion. So there's a lot to unpack there, but that's the simplified version of the answer to this. Otherwise, this would require a lengthier discussion. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. What is the Sunnis' point of view on Karbala? There are a number of different points of view. The worst of them are those who defend Bani Umayyah, and they still exist today. They say Imam Husayn alayhi salam was not allowed. They follow the doctrine of Muawiyah, that it is not permissible for a Muslim to revolt against the ruler. The ruler has been forced upon the Muslims by God, and therefore you are not allowed to revolt, to object, to reject to a ruler that Allah has imposed on you. This is what Muawiyah tried to instill through 3 different doctrines that we don't have time to get into right now. There are people today who still believe in this, and they are still lecturing now and teaching, saying how Imam Husayn alayhi salam was wrong and he deserved to die by the sword that he raised against Yazid. The majority of the Muslims disagree with this. The majority of the Muslims feel mercy and compassion towards Imam Husayn alayhi salam, but they do not know the story. The story has not really reached them. The story in its details does not reach the majority of the Muslims. They know that Imam Husayn alayhi salam was killed, and was killed by Yazid. The majority of the theologians and the historians of the Muslims have rejected Yazid as a legitimate ruler. So we'll just end it with that for now. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. I'm just trying to go directly to the questions that are directed to Karbala. I will keep the rest of the questions and get back to them inshallah, maybe through email or messaging. This one is quick. Is it haram to be racist? Yes, 100%. Is it allowed to marry someone from a different race? Absolutely, it is allowed to marry someone from another race, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to marry people that make us better. So that should be included and taken into consideration in the people that you bring into your life and you associate with as partners and as parents for your children. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Are there other books that I recommend to read similar to those mentioned on night 2 from the Western scientists and their beliefs in God? So there could be books about the biographies of scholars. Let's not focus on that. There are books about the scientific aspect. I think those are extremely important. Focus on those. They are extremely useful. 2 books that come to mind are Just 6 Numbers by one of the leading mathematicians in the world. His name is Martin Rees. He wrote a book called Just 6 Numbers. If you understand those 6 equations or numbers, variables, you understand all of the laws of nature. So he says, where did these 6 numbers come from? Why is it these 6 numbers and not other ones? Extremely useful, interesting book. There's another book by Stephen Meyer called The Signature in the Cell. So that's another book that is in line with what we were talking about. There are other scholars in that same line of thinking. William Dembski, Michael Behe, and others have written books in that same line. So there's a lot of books there to mention, but these are a couple of ones. Are there any books that impacted me personally from Western scholars? Yeah, but there's too many to list right now. What history books would I recommend that recount the history of the story of Karbala the way I do? I'm not repeating what is contained in a specific book. I'm giving you my synthesis of what I understand to have happened. I have read a lot of history in general, stuff we take and reject, Al-Tabari, Al-Baladhuri, Al-Mas'udi, and others. And I've also read the scholars of Islam and what they have written specifically about Imam Husayn, the life of the Holy Prophet, Imam Ali, Imam Hassan. That helps a lot to understand what happened in Karbala. There's also all the books of Maqatil, and some of them are extremely interesting. Abdul Razak al-Muqarram has a very good maqtal. There is another maqtal by Sheikh al-Qummi. There is a maqtal that has recently been translated in English by Sheikh Usama al-Attar. I haven't looked at the translation, but it appeared last year. It's the maqtal that Sheikh Abd al-Zahra recites, the well-known Iraqi reciter that people have been listening to for over 50 years. It's now been translated in English. Maqtal Abi Mukhnaf is the classic one, and it contains the classic version of those events, and Tabari is very close to that with more details. تفضلوا.
6 numbers by
Martin Rees, R-E-E-S. Just 6 numbers. That's the title. Just 6 numbers. The Signature in the Cell by Stephen Meyer. M-E-Y-E-R. Signature in the Cell. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. What do we mean exactly when we say neoliberalism? Neoliberalism, there's 2 ways to understand it. There's a political, social way. This is when we hear the left and the right in society, and then the extreme left and the extreme right. Liberalism in general, in this sense, means those who want to open up and let go of the past values of society and move on to being more open, more inclusive. And the extreme right is what is referred to today as the woke movement. On the other side, we have the right and the extreme right, and this is when you're trying to be conservative and keep the things as they are in society. This is the social political dimension that may be called neoliberalism or not, and how they react to it. This is not what we're talking about. What we talked about is the financial dimension. It's another way to say the capitalist system, the financial system, the economic system in the world, and how it has expanded to every other area in life, with all of the changes that have been introduced to the original capitalist system, and that's why it's called neoliberalism. That's in short the answer to what we mean by neoliberalism. Was there imams that lived a more luxurious lifestyle? Some of our imams were quite wealthy, including Imam Husayn alayhi salam. Imam Husayn was very wealthy, and he used his entire wealth for Karbala. Imam Husayn alayhi salam, when he left initially in his caravan, he had bags of money, of gold dinars with him that he would use. So no one should think that Imam Husayn alayhi salam does not have means in this world. And in fact, Imam Ali alayhi salam, with the way he lived in this world, we might think he was poor. Imam Ali was not poor at all. Our imams tell us that he bought and freed 1,000 slaves with his own work, the work of his own hands. When he would work in his gardens and he would collect the fruits and he would sell them, and he would use that money to go buy slaves and free them. And he freed 1,000 slaves from this work. Imam Ali alayhi salam had money enough to buy 1,000 slaves, but he's not interested in the material things of this world. Many of our imams had means in this world. Imam al-Hassan alayhi salam was known to dress quite luxuriously. Other imams were known to possess large lands and to reap the benefits of fruits, the profits of the fruits of their gardens that they would sell, and they had people working for them. And the Imams also sustained thousands upon thousands of Shia in the world, many of whom were very, very poor. The Imams had to have quite large financial means to do all of this. So pretty much all of our Imams lived quite well if they wanted to, but they were not interested in the material aspect of living luxuriously. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. What was the state of the Roman civilization from the time of the Prophet until Karbala? Why were they interested in allying with Yazid? What did Yazid get out of it? The Roman Empire were had alliances with Bani Umayyah in general from the time of the Holy Prophet ﷺ for geographic proximity and other reasons. No different than today. If you have a superpower, they're interested in what's going on anywhere else in the world, and then there are people in those areas who are willing to work with the superpower. That's exactly what was going on between the Roman Empire and the Islamic world. It was on the decline at that time, and we don't have time to talk about all of this right now. The Roman Empire had been on the decline for a couple of centuries, and it completely collapsed later. But at this time, compared to the Islamic world, it was quite powerful, and the Islamic world was quite modest in comparison. How did it benefit Yazid? In short, in the armies of Yazid, there were the red banners that entered. The red banners are either trained by the Romans, or they are actually Roman soldiers who entered the battle against Imam Husayn alayhi salam, so they were present there. I'm just looking at the next questions very quickly. How did the army of Yazid think they were fighting to get closer to God? No different than today. There are people who think that they are getting closer to God by performing heinous, disgusting acts, and they say that this is what God wants from us to do. No different. This is when you distort religion, and this is the reason why the Holy Prophet and God wanted people to follow the version of Islam that goes through Imam Ali and Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. That's the short answer. What did the Tawabun and their allies become later? They were all killed, and the few that were left either went and retreated in their homes, or they joined the revolution of Al-Mukhtar al-Thaqafi. What did the Mukhtar do exactly when the Tawabun finished? The Mukhtar did not have anything to do with their movement. He had his own movement. How did he face such large armies himself with small numbers? Al-Mukhtar was able to recruit very large numbers of people eventually. His mission initially started very small, but it grew quickly. Al-Mukhtar was a political mastermind and a military mastermind. And he was a genius at being able to use his entire power to avenge the blood of Imam Husayn alayhi salam. That's in short. Inshallah, maybe in the next year or so, we can talk about the revolution of Al-Mukhtar. Are there more stories or details about the marriage between Al-Hasan al-Muthanna and Imam al-Husayn's daughter, Fatima al-Kubra alayhi salam? Unfortunately, no. What we know is that they got married before Karbala, but Al-Hasan al-Muthanna fought in Karbala. Most likely they did not have any children until then. He was injured, his arm was cut in Karbala, and he had 18 major injuries, and he was carried from Karbala. They thought he had died. People from his mother's side carried him to Kufa, where he stayed for 3 months to heal. After he healed, he went on to live for another about 30 years. And he lived with Fatima al-Kubra, the daughter of Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam. She is the one who gave a speech after Sayyidah Zainab when they were in Kufa. She is considered a scholar, a muhadditha. She mentions a lot of the narrations of Imam Ali alayhi salam and the Holy Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alih. They had 5 children, including Abdullah al-Mahd and Al-Hasan al-Muthallath. So this is the descendants of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, goes through them. But as for the details of their lives together, I don't know anything else to add here. What was the sequence of events time-wise of Karbala? Imam Husayn alayhi salam reaches Karbala on the 2nd or 3rd of Muharram. There is back and forth negotiations that last until about the 6th or the 7th of Muharram. And then once they reach the 7th of Muharram, the roads get blocked, Al-Kufa is closed off, the armies are starting to finalize with very, very large numbers in front of Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam. Initially, Ibn Sa'd did not want things to get to that point, but it became too late. and Ibn Ziyad and Yazid wrote to him that he had to finish this and kill the Imam if he refuses. Otherwise, Ibn Sa'd would have preferred another outcome, but he listened to his heart, which said that he prefers to become governor over Ray and Jurjan as opposed to letting Imam Husayn alayhi salam go, and that was the outcome. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept our deeds. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us of those who are worthy of carrying the message of Imam al-Husayn alayhi salam ourselves, and to pass it on to the next generations. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin.